How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and to episode 5 of the What is Wrong with Your Overwatch League team series. Today is going to be all about the Washington Justice. Some of you will say this has been a long time coming, but I just wanted to give this team some time after they made the transition over to a full Korean roster. I wanted to stay patient with them so they could get used to their new system, but after 2 tournaments and a few weeks of the Countdown Cup qualifiers, I am ready to dive into it. Yeah, I know they recently won a game against the Houston Outlaws, but in the grand scheme of things, they made very little progress since making their transition over to that full Korean team. And I mean, beating a team that was severely underprepared for the most recent hero pool doesn't exactly inspire confidence. If you can only beat somebody when they are not at their best, doesn't that really only further prove that something might be wrong with your team? If the head coach of the Houston Outlaws comes out and says the players were struggling with this meta, then you know they aren't in the best of places. If even a team's head coach isn't feeling confident about his team, then that says something. There's a difference between that and earning your win against somebody who knows what they're doing. One of their worst metas versus one of Washington's best, and it was still a decently close game. Regardless of how you feel though, they are still a struggling team if you simply look at their match history and where they currently stand. Keep in mind that their biggest achievement this year was beating Houston on Sunday. You want to know where their other victories come from? Well, I'll tell you. They beat Houston a second time during week 2 when those guys were completely lost. They beat the Vancouver Titans in their first game with their new roster, and they beat the Boston Uprising. I'll let you guys be the judge here. Does that sound like a very impressive resume to you? Think about it. Their biggest achievement came against a team who didn't know how to properly play the meta. If that's all you've been able to do this year, then something is wrong. Generally speaking, the Justice have struggled this year, so I want to talk about them. Enough with the introductions though, because I think you get the point by now. So as per usual, let's set the scene with a little check-in on the standings. So after 19 regular season matches, the Washington Justice have a 4-15 record with a minus 28 map differential. Not to mention that they only have 20 map wins to their name. All of that is good enough for 19th place in the Overwatch League. Needless to say, that is nothing to brag about. It's been a rough season for a team who has changed a fair amount since the beginning of the year. While people's expectations for them varied during the preseason, I would say most people ranked them above the bottom 2 at the very least. Not only have they consistently played poorly, but they've somehow managed to play below even their lowest expectations, and that's why it's necessary to focus in on them here. It is ultimately my goal in this series to address the issues that bring struggling teams down and talk about ways in which they could potentially fix them moving forward. One little disclaimer before getting into this though, to all my Justice fans watching, remember that this will simply all be tough love. I'm not trying to be hard on them out of hatred or anything, that's not the point. The Justice are struggling, and it's crucial to identify the reasons behind it, that way we can figure out potential solutions to fix it in the future. So with that said, here are some problems and solutions I've come up with for the Justice. So to start, I want to address the elephant in the room, and that is their main tank situation. I've tried to be patient with Roar for about 2 seasons now, but I think I'm ready to say that he's not the answer. I'll be straight up honest. The only character he hasn't looked half bad on in his league career is his Winston. But looking at his Orisa and Reinhardt, I would say that him being mediocre on them is a kind way of putting it. I was hopeful that a fresh start on a new team would be just what he needed, but that has not been the case. And in a way, he's gotten 2 chances on the Justice this year. He had a chance to prove himself with the original Western lineup and a second one when the team transitioned into a full Korean environment. I remain very hopeful that maybe it would be easier for him to come and that would be the answer, but nothing has helped. No matter what the situation, Roar has continued to play at a level that just does not get it done. What's funny about Roar though is that he's only really a giga feeder on Orisa. He is currently the league leader in deaths per 10 minutes on her among all players with at least 1 hour of playtime. And obviously, with the amount that hero's played, that's not very good, and he doesn't really play her safely enough, I would say. Maybe he tries to frontline a bit too much, but besides that, his death rate is around average on Reinhardt, and below average, in fact, on Winston, believe it or not. More than anything, my problem with Roar is that he really doesn't contribute all that much. How often do you sit there and say, wow, what a great play by Roar? It doesn't happen very often, am I right? And his elimination rate when combining the 3 primary shield tanks would further show this, as he has 13.9 elims per 10, and that puts him in the bottom half of the league. Now, is this all his fault? No way, of course not. His support isn't always the best, and let's not forget that he wasn't getting the best coaching earlier in the season. We'll talk more on that in a bit though, because Roar still does deserve some of the blame. He's nowhere near what you'd call perfect. Some of those same communication issues that existed on the Gladiators are still there. The death rate might not always explain it the best, but he makes some silly positioning mistakes, not to mention that his decision making is questionable at times. There have been countless moments where it really does feel like him and the team are just not on the same page. Overextending has kind of been a problem for him this year at times. There have been so many moments where he just goes in by himself. It's as if he's that guy in ranked who doesn't say a single word in voice chat but then wonders why he's dying. He gives off a similar vibe to Janus during GOATS last year in a way, but with better support. It's the same old story. He wants to go in and do his thing, but the rest of his team often wants to play it slow. And that shouldn't come as much of a surprise considering their support line is somewhat passive. Well, at least Arc is. There's times where it feels like he's in his own world almost. I don't get it. It's been this way for way too long. No amounts of coaching and team environment changes are helping. He may not be cooperating as much as he needs to, in fact. I can't say anything for certain, but maybe Roar's just a really stubborn player. He might just be a tough player to coach and play with. I really don't know how true this is, but I've heard a rumor that Roar rarely plays Overwatch outside of scrims. And while I can't blame him for not wanting to play like every hour of the day, it kind of is his job to improve and just keep on getting better, you know? It might not be as beneficial as a scrim, but you can still grind and hone your individual skills by simply playing the game more and learning from your mistakes. And that signals to me that he might not care all that much. Could I be reading too much into this? Maybe, but it's not something you can completely rule out either. If there's a character issue with Roar, then something has to change before it's too late. While I doubt they'll do anything this year, I hope the Justice consider picking up another main tank before the signing window concludes at the end of the week. Even if he doesn't play all that much this year, I think having another option could be really good for them. Any sort of positive way to end the season on a good note would be great. It gives you something to look forward to for the future. The likelihood of a last moment signing doing anything good for them heading into the playoffs would be tiny, but you never know. All I know is that doing something is better than doing nothing at all and ignoring how bad the current situation is. With the way the team currently is, Roar is not going to work out. Between the synergy issues, the lack of contribution, and potential lack of motivation, I don't want him being the starter over there. That's enough about Roar though, because I think you get it by now. So keeping it going, my next problem with the Washington Justice is the main support position. Arc's style of play just doesn't work. It's okay to be more on the passive side, but how Arc plays kind of feels, well, excessive. I have no problem with having a low death rate, but you can't be unproductive with said death rate. That is simply unacceptable. Whether it would be on Brig or Lucio, you get the same results with Arc. Passive can work, but you need the right type of system. Take Sanguinar on the Spitfire, for example. He plays a more cautious style, but London are a somewhat cautious team, so it works out. He might not light up the scoreboard with the heals or the overall kill participation, but his team doesn't need him to, and he finds ways to make up for it, like with environmental kills, for example. If you combine the stats for Brig and Lucio, he has the second highest environmental kill rate in the league, only behind Moth. Arc isn't like that though. He has one of the lowest rates in the league with that stat. The Justice get rolled constantly, so they need Arc to do a lot, but he simply can't. He can't break that habit of playing back. It's what he's used to, and no matter what happens, the coaches can't seem to do anything about that. It's nothing new, really. He's had this horrible habit of playing really far back ever since he got traded. He naturally plays passive, then randomly makes a hero play every once in a while. Arc is not the right fit for the current system. I have no problem with keeping Arc on this roster because he's amazingly positive and he brings great leadership to the table, but he's not really a good fit. He's not really the starter, in my opinion. You could have him maybe be like a Baptiste specialist if the meta calls for it, though. That hero, I feel, plays more up to his comfort zone, but that's where I draw the line. I think it would be beneficial for the Justice to look into some Korean main support prospects when the season is over. You gotta get somebody who can be on the same wavelength with the rest of your team. Doing it now would probably cause more harm than good just because it's not always easy to add in new support players and incorporate them correctly, and this especially goes for when your team is not in the best of places. I think the Justice should take their time with this position. Get someone you know is going to work so you don't have to go through this type of thing again. The next issue I wanted to address with the Justice is their DPS. From what I've seen, they are severely inconsistent. Yeah, Tuba's looked pretty good since Genji became meta, but that's the only hero he's truly been capable on this year. he's had to lean heavily on Genji to keep himself relevant. While that works for the time being, what would he do if Genji were to suddenly get nerfed or just no longer be part of the meta for some reason? Unless his confidence is now through the roof, there's a good chance he goes back to being a non-contributor. I've been very happy with his performances for about the last month or so, but I fear a lack of flexibility could really lead to his downfall later down the line. He's shown that he has potential though, so you never know. Maybe you could prove me wrong if he has the chance to do so. If he were able to prove himself, or maybe he's surrounded with a better team, I would consider keeping him heading into Season 4. They definitely got him for relatively cheap, so he could make for a good budget player. But again, that really all comes down to if he can prove himself to be worthy, and I have my doubts about that. But to be honest, Tuba is definitely not as much of a problem as Stitch. I love Stitch, trust me there. He's been a part of pro Overwatch history for so long now, but to put it simply, he has not been getting the job done since he joined the Washington Justice. At first, I wanted to cut him some slack since he was on high ping, but that is no longer an excuse that can be made. He's at the Washington facility now, so what's the deal? I can't say there's been any particular game where he's really been overly impressive. He hasn't been the big playmaker his team has needed him to be, but to be honest, I can't really blame Stitch for not being this. If you look back at history, he's always been someone who thrives playing around his team. He's never been the godlike superstar hard carry for the most part. That's not what he's about. He's had his pop-off moments for sure throughout his career, but he depends on teamwork a lot. Stitch can be a very capable DPS player, but he needs the right type of scheme. He needs an all-around team who knows how to hold their own, like when he played for Runaway or Vancouver. That's a type of system he can be effective in, but it's not like that on Washington. In my opinion, Stitch is simply just part of a bad scheme fit. Unless the Justice makes some drastic changes, I think that Stitch will not be of any use for them. I think that covers my big player problems though for the most part. They have been nowhere near perfect, but I don't have too many issues with AimGod or Janu and how they've played. They haven't looked as good as they used to, but I feel that's to be expected given the current status of the team. Take AimGod for example. When he's not on Zen, it has proven to be extremely difficult for him to be a big-time playmaker because he's stuck healing his teammates who are pretty much low on health all the time. And that's pretty apparent if you look at the stats. He's top 5 in healing per 10 on Ana. Think about that. He's close to the likes of Fielder and Alarm, even though his team is way worse. Even though teamfights and overall games don't last nearly as long for him, he is still right up there with some of the elite players of the game. Meanwhile, his damage is in the bottom half of the league. He can't be as effective as he could be on certain heroes, and it's a shame. Because when AimGod is enabled, he's a beast. No other way around it. When the man plays Zen, he goes off. When he actually focuses on playmaking, his team looks so much better. Just look at him compared to all the other Zen players with at least 2 hours of playtime this year on him. He is still at the top for healing, sure, but he's also second highest for damage, only behind Jonak of all people. Now imagine what he'd be doing on a team that won more fights. Think about it. AimGod has most definitely not been the problem. As for Janu, he's had more problems than AimGod for sure, but he's still one of the better players on the team. I will admit, he struggled with the Sigma at times. He should be better than this, but he's not. But at the end of the day, he doesn't have the best main tank partner in the world, so it can be hard to find production on the Sigma. There's definitely some individual things he can improve upon, but I'm confident he could figure it out if he was in a better situation. Plus, Janu is more of a diva player anyway. That's always what he's been. That's kind of on Washington for not having a second off tank anyway, I'd say. They knew what they were getting into with Janu, so that's on them. Other than that though, there's only one other thing I'd have to say about the roster, and that of course is to sign more players. This tiny 7-man roster simply isn't enough. And technically it's only 6 guys because the other player is Lulsish, and obviously he is not going to play, nor will he ever be played for that matter. He's going to be released by the time this season ends for sure. You need to have other options on the table here. I've said it with Boston, I'm going to say it with the Justice as well. You need to have flexibility in case a certain player in your lineup can't fill certain needs. That should be really obvious. They don't even have to go crazy or anything. Just a few players to fill the voids would be great. Get yourself a third DPS, maybe a Sigma/Zarya player, and another main support. That's all I ask. But unfortunately, it is probably too late at this point. This will probably be Washington's team for the rest of the season. COVID-19 makes it pretty hard to get players, unfortunately. It's a tough situation for every single team, but at the same time, Washington could have made changes before COVID struck, and they still can make changes anyway, even with the pandemic going on. We've seen other teams do it, and that brings me to my next problem: management and/or ownership. I swear this organization literally doesn't care. They never want to do more than the bare minimum. They went for cheap in Season 2, and in Season 3 they literally had the bare minimum roster size to start, and they still have the bare minimum. So my question is, why? Why did you even invest in the league in the first place? I don't get it. Now, I will say, the team did recently get a new general manager back in May, so maybe things could change heading into the future, but I have my doubts. I think it more has to do with ownership, if I'm going to be completely honest. They've gone through 2 general managers already, so I feel the org just has that position as a scapegoat whenever they inevitably play poorly. They've already took the blame out on 2 different female GMs, which is just ridiculous in my opinion, so who's to say it won't happen to this male GM as well? Like, I feel like this is just the position they hate for some reason. I'm going to try and stay optimistic that their new GM could prove me wrong though, but I'm not getting my hopes up. The offseason's going to be the real test. You can't really do anything about ownership, so that really sucks. You gotta just hope the GM can figure something out. What I would do if I was the Justice is get more people in the org who you can trust and you know will be good for you. Overcome the negativity with overwhelming positivity. Optimize your chances of success in every way possible with amazing management, coaching, player development, and people who will take good care of your players and staff. If they fail to do anything meaningful during the offseason though, then that's when we say for certain that something is up with the Justice. Oh, and if you were wondering about the coaching, I actually quite like where the Justice stand in that regard. After John Galt left the team, they promoted Supreme, who I am a big fan of. That guy knows what he's doing, and now he's in full control. If you weren't already aware, he was a coach on the Spark last year. He's a good guy who is highly respected by other coaches in the Overwatch League. I kind of hope the Justice hold on to him for the future. If they give him some better pieces to work with, this franchise may finally be able to thrive one day. But yeah, I think that pretty much concludes my thoughts on what is wrong with the Justice, as well as what I would do to try and solve what they're dealing with. If they make a few more roster replacements, that could drastically help them. Just to recap, I would love it if they signed at least one more DPS, a better main tank player, maybe a Sigma and Zarya specialist if needed, and a more aggressive main support. Can you imagine what it would be like if they signed a big name like Mag or Pelican, let's say? That would be huge for them. They can use all the help they can get. But at the end of the day, it's going to be on the higher-ups to show some more dedication. They have to show that they actually want to spend money on big-name players. But I'm going to remain hopeful for you Washington fans, alright? I know the situation looks grim, but try to remain hopeful and just believe in your boys. Your team could be in a way worse situation than it is after all. They don't even need to do a total roster overhaul or anything. Just get a few more players. That's all you really need to do to start. And with that said, that is going to wrap up another episode of the What is Wrong with Your Overwatch League team series. What do you think is wrong with the Washington Justice, and how would you go about fixing it? Let me know down in the comment section. If you enjoyed today's video, it would mean a lot to me if you could like and subscribe. And if you wish to further support me, consider following me on Twitter at ATP Overwatch, joining the community Discord server through the link in the description, and becoming a channel member by hitting that join button down below. And as always, thanks so much for watching. I really do appreciate your support, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.